Hello guys and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video we're going to be talking about can you build muscle tissue at home. So in this video I'm going to run through some of the techniques and methods that you can use to preserve muscle tissue whilst you're training at home, and if we are being advantageous then building muscle tissue at home, rather than just give you another home or hit workout that you're probably sick of seeing. If you can implement some of the techniques and the methods that I'm going to go through and show you step by step today, then you'll have a much better time in preserving muscle tissue over this next periods of coming weeks or months or however long this lockdown isolation we're going to be in is. And I think the question should be switched from how can we build muscle at home to how can we progress from home. I think it's pretty obvious that it's going to be longer than a few weeks, hence why a lot of people have been panic buying equipment and so on. I believe the best way to approach and look at it is that we see it as more like a long-term fixture, because then we can start to strategize and have methods that we can move forward with, rather than just seeing it as a short-term or maybe a short-term fix and a period of where we just see it as a transition that we're trying to float and roll through. This way stops us having like expectations about stuff and things that will then disappoint us, because with high expectations and misestimated promises, it only leads us to feeling more anxious and less control when things don't go away or the things that we were mispromised don't actually happen. But without further ado, let's move into the important shit like building muscle. So as mentioned, for me this period is not going to be about building muscle, so to speak, but seeing it as a period of how I can progress other parts of my training, such as getting max push-ups, how many sit-ups I can do in 1 minute, how long I can hold the handstand for, maybe how many skips I can manage continuously in a certain period, just things that are going to challenge me in a different way. And if we look at this period less about how much muscle we can build and rather how we can protect those muscles and gains whilst challenging ourselves in new ways and making changes by being creative, then this will take away the stress and reversibility, which would not even kick in until 3 weeks of doing absolutely nothing. So my split while I'm doing some home training, there is going to be different parts too. So for me, I'm using a lot of band work, doing a little bit of kettlebell, dumbbell stuff where and when I can, and also doing some body weight workouts. But my split is pretty much going to be push, pull, legs, just because it's easy for me to break down and I can tackle certain movements and different planes of movements and different variants, whilst trying to reach failure or create some overload at home. So the first type of training that I want to try and kind of focus on first, I believe is one of the most important in stimulating muscle and trying to hit failure, is going to be tempo work. So moving slow and controlled. Tempo is what controls the speed with which you move throughout an exercise and how long you stay in the bottom and top positions of the movement, as well as the negative and eccentric portion of the movement. So manipulating the time under tension in an exercise changes the response your body will have. It's quite common in bodybuilding to increase the time spent in the eccentric portion of the exercise, as it promotes more of the lean muscle tissue growth, which is what we're looking for whilst doing some home training. So I'm going to put these numbers up on the screen, which is, or what you may have seen before when it comes to tempo training, and you may get a little bit confused about. So the first number on this kind of sequence is the eccentric portion of the exercise, which is a load coming down. So for example, when you're coming down into the lowering phase of the squat. The second number that you will see is the pause at the bottom, so how long that number in seconds therefore is you will pause for during the squat and how long you'll hold the squat for. Now the third number in this sequence is going to be the concentric or the ascending phase, so where you're going to come up through the squat, and this is how long that you will take to complete that rep up to the top of the movement. So if it's really low, you'll be explosive and fast. If it's really slow, you'll come up through the movement really slowly. And then just the fourth number in this sequence is obviously going to be the pause at the top. So for some movements like the squat, it's back to the start position, then you'll go immediately back down into the squat again. So they're the sequence of numbers, and that's how we can implement the tempo work. And implementing pause reps is a great way to control time under tension, as a way of using tempo training to improve the bottom of a movement or refine your form, and also put more emphasis on the trunk, i.e. our core. The second type of method I want to look at to progressive overload is partial reps. So these are a great way to progressive overload muscle groups and take things into absolute failure, especially maybe when we don't have sufficient load to overload the muscle groups. So with something called RPE, which is rate of perceived exertion, we may have hit, say, 8 reps, but to take the RP to 10, we can use partial reps to really fatigue the muscle. Another example of this may be the good old 21s movement, where we complete 7 reps at the bottom of a movement, 7 reps at the top of the movement, and then 7 full reps. What I am not promoting here though is poor form, or that you don't complete full reps, but simply another tool to use to hit failure and overload the muscle with the kit that we have available at the moment at home. The third method of progressive overload is going to be focused on what I've just talked about, which is RPE and working until failure. So as I said, RPE stands for the rate of perceived exertion. It's basically a measure that we can use of difficulty for the previous set. So since it can be quite subjective to how hard you find something at the rate and the difficulty, you can use RPE for basically anything. In fact, the concept of RPE has its roots in endurance training. It's something that I used when I was doing my PT qualification. Now, there's some benefits to using this, such as we can progress RPE and make it harder, or change the movement and make a movement harder to get a higher RPE. But it also does rely on a bit of honesty. So if you're going to cheat things and say, "Oh yeah, that was hard, mate," when it was really a piece of piss, then you're not going to get a lot from it. It's also going to be dependent on your state and how you are feeling that day in regards to motivation, energy, level of DOMs that day can all have an impact on your RPE. The third thing I want us to consider when we're looking at progressive overloading at home is going to be sets for time, not reps. So again, sort of focusing on time under tension. This is something that I've been doing quite a lot with clients. So instead of setting maybe 3 times 12 reps of a movement, we might look at 3 times 1 minute instead. So this then allows us to progressively overload time. So say we have a set schedule from Monday to Friday that we're sticking to in regards to our training regime. We may then in week 2 look at doing 3 times sets of bicep curls for 1 minute 20 seconds. Then week 3, we might add in an extra set and do 4 times 1 minute. So as you can see, we're progressively overloading the time instead of the rep ranges or the load, and we can stimulate the muscle groups that are working more by increasing the time under tension. So it's a really good method to use at home if you've only got bands or a little bit of kit, because most people will be able to hit 12, 15 reps and still not be getting anywhere near failure. The fourth method of progressive overload I want to try and look at, which will help and stimulate the muscle, is something called isometric hold. So isometric exercises are moves where you're going to hold a position under tension, and often we think of the core when we look at this kind of isometric movements are quite apparent here, such as the plank. While planks are a good use of isometric core moves, they're great for if you have limited space, limited time, little equipment, and again, working until failure, because you can just pretty much hold it until your body gives in. I tend to use them at the end of the workout to finish off and burn out on fatigue. Due to the muscle not working through a range of motion, we don't get a concentric or eccentric movement through lengthening, but instead a constant contraction. So recent studies have shown that maximal isometric exercise recruit up to 5% more of these motor units than any other type of exercise, which means it's a great tool you can use whilst we're in isolation and quarantine, because we can progressively overload this again. We would use a tool of time and trying to hold for longer, or even adding some resistance to the hold if we wanted to progressively overload it. It's quite simple. The fifth method that we're going to look at is movement patterns. So as opposed to some of the other ones, what we're going to look at is take, for example, a simple and then a difficult exercise, and how we can change the way an exercise looks or the movement in an exercise. So if we take split squats, we can hit a split squat. We may then progress that onto a Bulgarian split squat, which will raise the difficulty and need a lesser load and also raise our RPE. So by progressing to a more complex movement, we can progressively overload due to the difficulty of the movement being a lot harder. However, this doesn't always mean more recruitment of the muscle being worked, and can be a point where we are challenging the core, balance and endurance a little more. Now it's important to note that even if you're going to train suboptimally over the next couple of weeks or however long this COVID-19 lasts, you're not going to lose your gains as long as you're getting some stimulation there. And plus there's pretty much more important shit going on in the world at the moment rather than, well, over you losing a deadlift rep or losing a bicep pump. Plus no one is even going to see you in this period, even if you are getting diced or stronger, because we're pretty much spending all our time inside and the only person who's going to see you is maybe your next door neighbour as you do the garden walk in your boxies in the morning. Chances are when we go back to the gym, we're going to build muscle and recruit muscle quite quickly anyway when we go back to progressive overload and via weight. So don't worry if you're not getting perfect workouts in. As long as you're hitting a workout, you're doing some work, you're stimulating the muscle group, you're going to be alright. Something that I will recommend though, to close this video out, is like I recommended in my last video, is getting some bands, exercise bands that you can use. They're really good to progressively overload certain movements. They're very versatile. We can use them indoors, outdoors, and can be really useful for some of those methods of progressive overload that we've been through today. The other thing, get hold of notebook. Start scribbling stuff down, putting some of your numbers on there that you're trying to hit, putting your goals down on there, or what you can do is jump onto the Micro School sort of plug. It has a full progress tracker on there that you can use to measure some of your metrics, keep track of your weight, put your progress images up there, and just another tool to keep accountable over the next few weeks. I will leave the link to that in the description box below if you want to try a 7-day free trial. Have a little look around the site. And yeah, that's it. So have a play around with some of these methods, use the ones that work for you, throw away the ones that don't, and you have got one job to do. Please, if you benefited from this video or enjoy this video, then give it a massive like and a thumbs up. And if this is your first time visiting my channel, then please drop down while you're there and just hit that little subscribe button. And I will catch you in the next video, guys. Take care.